All right, let's get into the fun stuff. I'll throw it to Jason right away just to talk about general strategy for brackets because I know one of the cool things about using PoolGenius is it's going to give you different results and recommendations based on the size of the pool, the scoring system, and the payout structure.
Yeah, first I want to say thanks for having me on, and I'm excited to be with you. I think we improved our outside shooting. I've seen video, Mike. I think this podcast we've improved out our outside shooting with this version, from what I've seen. So I'm excited to go forward. But yeah, on the bracket stuff, yeah, we're gonna adjust for pool size. Now, some of those may be subtle depending on how the differences. Some of them may be large. Some of them may be different champions, but some years it may be the same champion, but adjusting some of the other picks and which key risks you take on the other side of the bracket, or which slightly undervalued 2 or 3 seed or one, that you go with. Because let's be honest, you don't need to get too crazy in a lot of pools. Um, People think you need to get like super crazy. There are so many combinations of just 1, 2, 3s, and 4 seeds that if you hit that combination, you're probably not going to be duplicated by too many people in the pool unless it's literally the top two chalk teams.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a common mistake is people either get like too crazy or they get too chalky, and we're trying to find that sweet spot in the middle. Um, can you talk to I think a lot of people that play in pools that are my friends and whatnot, we play in pools that are like, I don't know, 30 to 50 people, pretty casual people
Yeah.
picking. I'm guessing how contrarian you get depends on how chalky your champion. And, let's think most of these formats, the scoring system does 10, 20, 40, 80, 160, 320 as you escalate through the rounds, which puts a ton of emphasis on the champion in the final four. So,
Yeah.
I've been years where someone's had a terrible bracket, they have a unique winner, and then they can pull it down. So why don't you speak to like that size of pool that's a little bit more casual?
Yeah. So I think in that size of pool, you don't need to get too contrarian. Um, and it depends on your payout spots too. Like if you're literally going for first only, then it's a little different than if there's like 5 payout spots, 10 payout spots, where you can get in a cash spot by literally just beating most of the crowd, and letting them kind of like make bad picks early that cost them points. I do think there's opportunities as you get from like 50 to like just above that. Um, there's opportunities to do what I would call like scoop a champion, even if you don't pick him as the champion. Where let's say you pick Duke, but then you take a team that's being underpicked by like below 5%, where you might be able to like you take them to the final. If they win the title, even if Duke loses, you might win that pool because nobody had him as the title pick. And so you're taking like a calculated risk on like a top 5 to 10 option where you're trying to scoop the pool. That's also a strategy we've seen pop up in some of our simulations in the past where you grab a really good team that just won't be picked in that size of pool.
Yeah, that's an interesting note. So you're saying having Duke win over a runner-up that's not as picked, and there's a few kind of like I guess free roll situations like that, and it's important to think through that you're not trying to be perfect. You're trying to beat your competitors.
Yeah.
So what Jason's saying is, even if you think this lower owned team beats Duke in the championship game, you're not really getting extra reward by picking them just because nobody else is going to have them in the champion game. So them just being in the championship game versus Duke, you might solidify winning the contest and not put yourself at risk of Duke beating that team. Curious how you think about, and Alex, Jack, feel free to chime in here as well. As far as like first round upsets going into round two, I was thinking about that a little bit because we've got a couple of 12 seeds this year where the line is pretty tight, and in some cases the 12 seed actually favored. Is it worth having them go to the Sweet 16 as well, or do you just kind of hope you win that first game, and maybe you're still cheering for them to win because you don't have the 4 seed going deep, but you don't take that extra risk of also advancing them to the Sweet 16?
Yeah, I think there's it's very year dependent on how other people are picking, but I think you're talking to Colorado State, and we got that situation. And I know people got burned by the Mountain West New Mexico Lobos last year as the 11 seed. But I can tell you that I've been handicapping, and I already hit a winner on Colorado State to win the Mountain West future. And they basically played how I expected, which is they are I said pre-tournament, they are the best team in this conference right now, and they are not being priced like it. because their lineup changed in late December and into conference play. They are not playing the same rotation that lost a bunch of games. This is a legit good team. Does that mean they'll win? No. I mean, Memphis is a quality team, but there's a reason they're favored. And they are on a roll. And so if you're in an upset bonus and all, it's almost like you have to take them. I mean, if you're getting a 12 seed and you're getting bonus points, you have to take them. Now, Maryland's a tougher draw. Maryland's a good team. So I don't know about advancing past that, but it depends on the scoring system. But that's my thought on Colorado State. I don't know if you all have any thoughts on them, or UC San Diego is the other one, I think.
Yeah, I just think it's dependent on the pool, that the type of pool you're in. Like if you're in a big public pool, I think Colorado State will probably be underrepresented in the selections. Like ESPN, people are just going to click in 5 seed Memphis more often than they should. But if you're in a smaller, sharper pool, I think you'll see a lot more Colorado State. So just trying to think through what my opponents might do is kind of how I play those kind of decisions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd agree with that. I think kind of in more casual pools, which I assume most listeners are doing, Colorado State is kind of just a gimme pick because the majority of pools are going to pick Memphis, or the majority of brackets are going to pick Memphis, and Colorado State is favored. I think UC San Diego and VCU, who are slight underdogs as 12 and 11 seeds respectively, are also good upset options. But I think in a lot of pools, it's just not necessary. Like I think if you're in a 20 person office pool, you should just pick the team that's more likely to win because you can differentiate. Like you don't really need to differentiate that much because people are gonna force upsets, even though it's the less likely outcome. So you can kind of get contrarian just by playing the chalk. But
Or,
I mean, I think if you're in an upset pool that gives you bonus points for being upsets, those are also really good choices.
yeah, and you mentioned, VCU there. I believe they're 2.5. I guess the line's gone up to 3.5. 3.5 point dogs against BYU, but just pick BYU to lose in round 2 in those smaller pools, and then if you get the upset, you're still actually pretty happy that VCU beats BYU for the most part because you don't have them, advancing to the Sweet 16, whereas a decent amount of other people will have them advancing. Alex, you mentioned kind of like figuring out what our opponents are going to do, which is really important and different for pools. I know I played in a higher stakes DraftKings bracket last year, and I went to like the quote unquote super sharp pivot of Arizona, and they ended up as the 2 seed, being 3 times as owned as North Carolina, which was a 1 seed. And there's some scenarios like that this year where Gonzaga sticks out, where if you're in these sharper pools, you might think like they're a sharp pick, but they probably end up getting overplayed, and then they get underplayed in the casual tournament. So Jason,
Yeah.
obviously team rankings is like a big part of what they do, is trying to figure out what other people do to figure out what bracket you should play. So how do we, figure out what our opponents are going to do?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I guess you got to know your crowd as best possible, and that's something we can't answer for you. That we're going to give you advice on like what data we're seeing, and as you might suspect, a lot of it's what you would think a casual like Memphis is being picked more than Colorado State, and that will be the case in most pools. But there will be some that's not the case, and you just have to, if you've played in a pool, you got to apply that understanding of how people pick. That's the best thing you can do in a survivor pool or in a bracket pool or whatever, is use your own knowledge and adjust off things. But yeah, I'm gonna give you some intel on this year we're seeing from the data. I don't know if it'll hold up, but like all the number 4 seeds are values to the Sweet 16, which doesn't make sense to me. Like normally people are picking teams, but I guess they're just picking maybe an upset there because they're going to take the 1 seed anyway. I don't know what the rationale is right now. So we're seeing a case where like Maryland and Purdue and teams like that are just not being picked at the same level we have their odds on. And you mentioned things like why just don't pick that team the next round. That's kind of what our odds estimates are trying to do, is assess risk. Like we aren't going to give you a team and say pick this team to upset. But the fact that Houston has Gonzaga in their region and Duke has Mississippi State Baylor, which is a much easier 8-9 matchup on form and how those teams line up today, gives Duke an advantage beyond, like, if Houston was in Duke's region, Houston's odds would go up to advance, and then they'd have a little better odds, and you'd be getting a little better pot odds. So just knowing which teams may have a tough path can let you lay off teams in the latest rounds just on a risk standpoint. And I think just knowing that you don't have to pick against them right away. You just kind of don't take them to win it as much, or don't take them to be in the Final Four as much if they have that path.
Yeah, you guys looking at like, I don't know, ESPN, Yahoo public pick percentages or like historical data on what people are doing with, 1 seeds versus 2 seeds in the Final Four, without giving away too much of,
Yeah,
of how the sausage
I
is
don't
made?
want to reveal all the sites, but we get data from the big sites. So definitely ESPN, which is going to be chalkier, sure. I mean, actually, when I take that back, ESPN data actually tends to show people pick too many like random upsets or too many upsets, maybe more so than a run your pool or something would have. And so, like, we're getting data from all different sizes and multiple sites, and we're kind of weighing them. Like, we did do that with survivor pools too. We know to like tweak certain data, like we're going to get certain biases from certain sites, and we want to try to figure out where the true number is.
Yeah, I'm sure where you're located to matters quite a bit,
Yeah.
especially with the SEC this year with those 1 seeds, how much they're going to be picked relative to Duke. I know where I am in the Northeast. It
St.
seems
John's.
like a lot of people are yeah, St. John's, but even like just growing up, like a lot of like either Duke or myself, North Carolina fans. So I expect my casual pools to see a lot of Duke. They're the overall number 1 seed,
Yeah.
and just seeing them go there. But I'm sure if you're elsewhere, you could see that evened out a bit more
Yeah, we
with
haven't seen
Florida,
that
Auburn.
nationally yet on Duke. We haven't seen it yet. That doesn't mean it can't change through Monday and Tuesday. I think maybe there's a little hesitancy on the Cooper Flag injury. I'm not personally as concerned that he won't play. I mean, if he misses the 16 seed game out of precaution, I don't think that matters, and they don't play till Sunday. And I'm sure, given that the X-rays are negative, he will play. And so I'm not as concerned about Flag, but maybe people are laying off a little bit, or maybe it's because there's plenty of other good 1 seed options. So we aren't seeing an overpopularity, but like you said, if you're in an area where Duke's going to be popular, that's going to be a different type of pick. And congrats on North Carolina, by the way. I actually think they should be in from they're a top 40 team that isn't getting in by greatness by association, like the 13th team from the SEC, who I looking to fade those teams a little bit, to be honest with you. I think North Carolina come in with a chip on their shoulder. I mean, they committed a lane violation, thought their NCAA life was done, and now they're in it. I think they're going to come in with like kind of no pressure at all.
Yeah, I don't know if you've heard they were 1-12 in quad 1 games. I don't know if you've heard that.
Yeah, I have. And so I've heard that over and over again. They also have like 6 of those losses are to teams on the top 2 seed lines that 90% of this field would have gone 0-6 against. And so I'm actually shocked that the committee put them in, but I think if you put that in context, they've won enough games to get in.
Yeah, and I've got some stuff for North Carolina and those playing teams later. But you mentioned the flag thing. Alex, I'll throw it to you before we get too team specific here, just to talk through some of the key injuries, because I know a lot of people, myself included, are kind of jumping into this over the past week or so and super excited and might be looking at, anyone can pull up the KenPom rankings or whatever and see what they have, but not understand the context there as far as teams that are on the rise or on the downswing due to personnel issues.
Yeah, this is one of the heavier injury seasons, especially towards the tournament that I can remember. But yeah, Cooper Flag, I agree with Jason. I think he's going to play either in the opening game or the round of 32. I'm not overly concerned, but I do think since there's so many great 1 choices, like people are spooked a little bit on taking Duke. So you might actually might see some value on Duke in certain pools. But beyond that, Jawan Roberts has an ankle issue for Houston. He's pretty important to what they do. I think he'll be back in the opening round, but that's one to watch. Grant Nelson has a leg issue for Bama. That one's actually a bit more concerning. It doesn't sound like positive remarks coming out of Bama camp. So I wouldn't be surprised if he had like actually a serious injury and ends up missing the tournament. So that's something to keep an eye on. Texas Tech, Chance McMillan, Darian Williams, they've had injuries, it seems, lingering the last like 4 to 6 weeks. I think they're both going to play, but we've seen them kind of yo-yo in and out of the lineup the last few weeks. So keep an eye on that. The Iowa State guys, Tamin Lipsey is going to play. Keyshawn Gilbert is actually out for the tournament. So that's a pretty big knock on them, although I don't think that kind of changes their round 1 matchup much. They played a lot lately without him. Another couple injuries. Arkansas, Adu Thoreau's out. He might be back for the second week, but I wouldn't necessarily count on it. However, they are getting freshman guard Boogie Flan back, which is a nice little bump to them. They have Kansas in their opening game, so that could be a pretty good game. Kentucky, a 3 seed, Lamont Butler is going to play. Jackson Robinson's out though. Memphis, Tyrese Hunter seems like he's going to be out. Don't have anything definitive. And then Baylor's just down to their last big man with O'Meara left. Josh O is out. They have a pretty tough matchup against a pretty large and tall and physical Mississippi State team in the opening round. So that's not a great spot for them given their lack of depth. But yeah, these are all just like the top 4 or 5 seed injuries. So a lot of moving parts to keep an eye on.
Yeah, we'll go into how strong the number 1 seeds are relative to typical. Jack, I'll ask you about that. I know I saw a tweet from the Field of 68 that said, only 4 teams this century have entered the NCAA tournament with a plus 35 rating or higher on KenPom. 2001 Duke, who won the championship. 2015 Kentucky, Final Four. 2019 Virginia, champion. And 2021 Gonzaga, runner-up. This year, all 4 meet that criteria, if I have it correct and understand that correctly. So that seems pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably the best group of number 1 seeds of my lifetime. Dalton Cates had a tweet that Duke has the highest adjusted efficiency rating on KenPom going into the tournament since 2002. Florida, Houston, and Auburn are also in the top 6. I think it's a really good year to pick a 1 seed to win it all. 16 of the last 17 champions have been either a 1 seed or UConn. And yeah, I mean, I think this is a good year to pick a number 1 seed pending the injury to Cooper Flagg. I echo what Jason and Alex said, that I expect him to be fine. He participated in shoot-around the day after he got injured, and reporters said he didn't have a limp, but that is one to keep an eye on. By the time Duke plays their first round game, he'll have been more than a week removed from it. So if not playing Friday, definitely should play Sunday. Same with Roberts for Houston. He said after suffering the injury, he was going to sit out the rest of the Big 12 tournament with hopes of being ready for the NCAA tournament. Seems like it was mostly precautionary that he sat out the rest of the Big 12 tournament, so I'd expect him to be out there too. But I mean, yeah, this is just an elite group of 1 seeds, especially Duke being the best team of the past 20 or so years going into the tournament.
Jason, I know it might be hard to answer this because it's what you guys do at PoolGenius is so specific to the format people are choosing, but is the strength of the 1 seeds, have you noticed that? And I know your sims, I think, aren't live until this evening officially, but is that impacting kind of what you're seeing as far as some of the brackets you're suggesting?
Yeah, I've seen them. They will go. I've seen what has been simulated and what's probably going live here by 5-6 o'clock. So if you set up a pool, you'll see that by tonight with an early bracket. We will run a second run on Wednesday night, by the way, where we make adjustments. Like if we get more news on Nelson or think we'll tweak teams up and down, because we definitely have a lot of question marks where we're willing to move on that team, and we may adjust it, and that'll change the sims. But yes, unless it's a crazy scoring system, I can tell you that most of our brackets are 1 seed heavy on a champ, and then they alternate kind of. You can play. So what we do, by the way, is we will create 5 brackets within, say, a particular run, and you can look at all 5. We'll have what we call our best bracket, like this is our top. But here are brackets that are optimized off that. Like if that one didn't do well, or you don't like that one, here's ones that would do well if that one doesn't do well. Like, maybe a key pick on Texas Tech to make a deep run to surprise everybody instead of the chalk on one side. Or maybe, the champion you had losing in the Final Four, or the team you had losing in the Final Four, wins it all, or something where that wins. And so we have those. And yeah, I can tell you, this is so much better than a few years ago. Now, I do think historically some of it's driven by what's happened in college basketball. The average team's gotten worse. The mid-majors have just been hit with transfers, and they don't have veterans anymore. And so I think if you compare, that's what most rating systems do, is to the average, right? So I don't know if we can compare to 2001 in any meaningful way, honestly. But compared to 2023, 6 teams this year in our rankings are better than Alabama. who entered as the first overall seed. Brandon Miller also came in with an injury, and they lost in the Sweet 16. So there were no 1 seeds that year, and that was a historic year of wipeouts where no 1 seeds made it. But part of that was we had a bunch of teams that were more like 2s and 3s up top. And so I think this year there are more dominance, and I don't see all 4 getting beat. Somebody can beat any of them, but that opens the path for the others that stay alive. And so I think that one of them will stand the test for sure.
All right, let's go around and give our most underrated teams here. Alex, we'll start with you and then go to Jack and then to Jason.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tricky because it depends on like what you're trying to do with the most underrated, like whether it's just like underseeded or overseeded versus like disrespected in the whole bracket picking process. So like I see a team like Michigan as a team who's going to get underplayed in a lot of brackets just because they're a 5. They're only like a 2-point favorite. They're going to be a trendy like upset pick to lose in the first round. But I mean, I think they're a difficult team to prep for in a tournament setting. They play kind of funky. Dusty May's really good at making schematic adjustments. He's had a Final Four run lately with Florida Atlantic, with his big man Vlad Golden, who transferred from FAU with him. I think there's kind of a tough out, and just like pure power rankings don't really account for that necessarily. So Michigan's a team I'm going to be higher on than I think most people are. And then like another team like BYU, I think they're just like a total like chaos team. They chuck threes at like a top 15 rate, which is actually down from last year when you picked them in the Survivor opening round. But that's neither here nor there, Leone. But I just think their high variance style plays well for being like a 6 seed in a bracket. Like if they run hot on threes, they can beat some good teams. And like they went on the road, won at Iowa State. Like that's a pretty impressive win. So that's a team I'm willing to take chances on to make like a little mini run to the Sweet 16, Elite 8. But like I think I'm with everyone else. Like the 1 seeds are so strong that I'm not going to take many shots with Cinderella's making it to the Final Four this year.
Jack, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pick the obvious one. I feel like the obvious one's Gonzaga. I'm going to take Louisville. They are kind of similar to BYU in that they bomb a lot of threes. I think they're a little bit better equipped to handle different types of games than BYU personnel-wise. I think that they can handle the more physical games maybe a little bit better than BYU. I'm also not really going to take them very far. I mean, they play Auburn in the second round. It's not really a team I'm looking to fade, but I will say Auburn is currently the lowest rated number 1 team on number 1 seed on KenPom, despite being the top overall seed. And there was a point in the year when Auburn was rated similarly to Duke. Their last 2 months have been a little bit sketchier. Janai Broom has been hampered a little with injuries. He's back now. He's going to play. He's been playing, but maybe he's not as healthy as he was early in the season. So I think, I mean, they're an 8 seed. They're 23rd on KenPom, 19th on Bart Torvik. They bomb threes at a high rate. That's a high variance style that potentially lends itself well to an upset. And they play a team in Auburn who's the number 1 overall seed, but maybe slightly more vulnerable than the other 1 seeds based on their past couple of months.
Jason, who's your underrated team?
Yeah, so I got several, but I'm going to limit it outside the top 4 seed lines. That's not to say, again, that I would pick all these in a bracket. I may look for alternate formats to play them. Love seed-based pools, by the way. But some that we have rated high. I mean, Colorado State. I talked about them. I feel like I've got a good read on them. I've watched them. I've stayed up late. I was like, this team is way better than Utah State. This team is way better than Boise. And all they did was jump on them and have like a 25-point lead throughout the game until late. So the scoring margins aren't even indicating how dominant they were in those games. They have, I think, a future NBA player is their star. I think he will get a look on an NBA roster, Neek. And so I think this is a dangerous team. This is a dangerous team. We've seen teams like Oregon make runs out of the 12 seed. This team has that capability. North Carolina. I mean, so if I'm looking at teams that have made runs, it's not the teams that got in as the 13th team out of the best conference, as like 8 and 10 in their conference. It's either teams outside the Power 5, like Florida Atlantic and like, Loyola Chicago, or and I think Colorado State's kind of on the cusp of that, or it's teams that from major conferences that were poo-pooed as being in the weakest conference. They barely got in. They didn't, quote, beat anybody, but the metrics said they were better than the committee thought. And so I think North Carolina is that team this year. Sure, they could flame out, but they're the ones capable of going on a run, I think. Like where you're like, this is Syracuse as a 10 seed or 11 seed. This is, UCLA in 2021. I think North Carolina is that type of team. Still high variance situation. Still could lose right away to San Diego State, of course. But that's what they're capable of. And then, you mentioned Louisville. I think Louisville's a great call. Should have been a 5 or 6 seed. This team, like what they've changed from last year is amazing. And the fact that the committee says they don't care about like early versus late. I don't know why. The data shows, like, especially like with a team with a new coach and new players and transfers, they started 6-5, but they've been like 21-2. They went like 18-2 in the ACC, and they got an 8 seed. Like I'm just stunned. They're ranked like 13th. I think the AP poll voters have it closer. Maybe they're not the 13th best team, but they're closer to that than they are to like the 32nd or 33rd best team. And that one is a crazy one to me too.
A couple notes on what you guys mentioned. On the North Carolina one thing I noticed last year in one of the bigger DK pools, I believe there was a 10 seed that was in the first 4 that ended up being favored in round 1 that was picked at an incredibly low rate. So I think there's just a little bit of bias in terms of how the bracket's presented with those first 4 teams. That
we definitely see that. Yeah,
for sure.
Sure.
People are less likely to take them. So
I think if North Carolina wins, they're going to be favored over Mississippi by a point or 2. I do. And they'll be underpicked because you see North Carolina / San Diego State, and people don't want to pick it. So we do see that the play-in game winners are undervalued relative to other teams on that same seed line.
Yeah, so you can also pick against Jack's Illinois squad if you want to go that angle. The other thing, it's hard to get, one thing when we're daily fantasy sports players, we talk about like correlation and stuff a lot. Mm-hmm. It's hard to do that. I'm just curious if you guys correlate. Jason, you're talking about like maybe these lower teams in the SEC are a little bit overrated. Some of the ACC teams underrated. If you play that correlation into a bracket at all, it's just one way to like, instead of getting like 2 or 3 things right, you're just saying, okay, ACC is better than people think. That's going to apply to like a couple teams. SEC at the end isn't as strong. I wouldn't go too far with it. Obviously, there's exceptions.
I think the SEC is the best conference, and I also think basing how dominant they are off November, December is probably going to lead you to overvalue them. Both things can be true. Like, I don't think they'd go 16-2 against the ACC if they played today or whatever that number was, which was insane. The ACC was the youngest conference. SEC was the oldest. That's an advantage in November. That matters. And so I do think you're getting some biases. But it might be like a half point to a point, which matters in betting and odds, right? But don't go crazy. Like maybe they're all collectively a half point overvalued, right? Which matters.
Nuance there for sure. Go ahead, Jack.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say if anyone is interested in reading a little bit more about the potential of the SEC being overrated, Ken Pomeroy on his Substack had an article saying that the SEC is the best conference, one of the best conferences ever, but like based on the way that it's being rated right now, there's still a pretty good chance, a more than likely chance that it's being a little bit overrated, which I thought was an interesting read.
We've definitely seen that in past tournaments, right? Conferences that get a bunch of teams in, because there's a bit of a circular logic. Like Vanderbilt's good because they beat Texas. Texas is good because they beat Vanderbilt, and they're and so they all get credit for beating each other. And I think Florida's legit great, and I think Auburn's really good, and Tennessee's really good. After that, I think there can be some question marks where those teams are getting boosted up by beating each other, and maybe there's just a half point of value here and there against them. But yeah, for sure, you could see that in the SEC.
Jack saved the more obvious underrated team, at least in terms of seeding, in my opinion, for me in Gonzaga. I am not a ball knower, so I am strictly looking at the numbers and a lot of the, advanced metrics. KenPom, wherever you look, they'll have Gonzaga sticking out a little bit like a sore thumb when you're just scanning through the list and looking at the seeding. Obviously, that's represented in the betting markets. They're decent favorites for an 8-9 game. But it's a very tough matchup, round 2 against Houston. And that's one where if you're in a really big pool, like a big casual pool, I feel like taking them to make a run is an interesting contrarian thing where you can play the rest of the ones pretty chalky and then just have Gonzaga making a run. But obviously, you're a 20-person pool. It's not worth it. Like I said, if you're in like a super sharp pool, there's probably people on Gonzaga because it's nothing that the market isn't seeing. It's just those pools where people aren't really looking at what the market's doing would be the ones that I like.
Yeah. I think Gonzaga, let's say this. I'm not sure they're the 8th best team in the country. Some of those could be inflation from beating up on cupcakes, and that's what our data shows. They've performed a little worse than against the top half of their schedule, which can matter. But they're probably like a top 15 team at worst. I mean, he's not that far off, right? And so, yeah, fade them in a sharp pool where everybody's going to be on Gonzaga and play them in others. I mean, seed-based pools. If you're in a public seed-based pool where you get a point for every seed number, my gosh, Gonzaga seems like a team you want to play just in case they go on a run like North Carolina did a few years ago. Because that's what happens with these 8 seeds. They're underpicked because they have such a big barrier right away, so people are afraid to take them. But if you're in a risky pool, those are the kind of picks you should be making. Because if it hits, like, people don't have it.
There's also an element of, if they win that round 2 game, it's likely that they are very, very good, and then they can make a run.
Yes, they would be.
So it's, sometimes there's that aspect to it. As far as overrated teams, I'll kick it off. I'll go with Memphis. Again, I'm kind of cherry picking the easier ones where they're actually an underdog in round 1 to one of Jason's favorites team there in Colorado State. Alex touched on the injury for them with Hunter, who seems like he's probably going to be out. So I'll go with Memphis. I'll throw it to Jason. We'll go reverse order for the overrated teams.
Okay, I'll just tell you teams that we have down, that we've adjusted down on some. I mean, Arkansas is one. We still don't know. I mean, Fland is a talented player, but how's that chemistry going to work first game back? And quite frankly, they were wildly inconsistent, and they're not good on offense. They're not a great shooting team. I think Kansas. I'm a Mizzou alum, so I can't say super nice things about Kansas, but Kansas, I think, can win this one. If I were in a survivor pool, Kansas would be one of the teams I'm leaning on. Here, I think Arkansas is probably a little overvalued, and I wonder about Fland's impact right away.
I want to echo Memphis. I think Tyrese Hunter's going to be out. That's what they said during the broadcast yesterday. But I'll also say another kind of low-hanging fruit in Iowa State with Keyshawn Gilbert out. He started off the one thing is with Gilbert is that he started the year off really hot, and then he's kind of been in and out of the lineup over the past month or so with this injury that is also rumored pretty heavily to be like some behind the scenes mental stuff. So it's not like they aren't used to playing with him or playing without him. But he is a big piece for them. And when he's actually at 100%, he's one of their best players. And then Tamin Lipsey should be good to go, should be active, but he had a groin injury and he missed their last game. If they're down, if Lipsey's at less than 100% and they're down Gilbert, just so much falls on the shoulders of Curtis Jones. And they play a good Lipscomb team that shoots a ton of threes at a very high clip in round 1. I'm not saying they're going to lose in round 1, but I'm saying with just the personnel, we'll say questions they have right now with Gilbert out and Lipsey potentially hampered. I'll say Iowa State is slightly overrated, but I don't think there's a ton of massively overrated teams. I feel stronger about the underrated teams.
All right, Alex.
I tend to agree with Jack on that one. My overrated team is Michigan State. They're actually 35th preseason on KenPom. I think they overachieved a bit. They used their depth to kind of work through conference play. I just don't really love these high-seeded teams that don't have a clear rotation. They play like 11, 12 guys, 10, 11 guys. They do have an emerging scorer in Jace Richardson, but out of the whole 1 and 2 seeds, I'm definitely lowest on Michigan State, and I think they could find themselves in some close games, second and third round of the tournament.
Yeah, you mentioned them not being ranked as well in the preseason. I did see a note somewhere on X about these teams that have earned top 2 seeds that weren't ranked in the preseason, and the track record there, whether it's, coincidence, small sample or whatnot, but it just hasn't been that strong for those teams.
Yeah, I can find that note. I think we have it somewhere. But anyway, yeah, it's let me click on Michigan State's note in our
I
team
didn't
notes.
even I hadn't even seen
Right.
that, but it makes me feel better about my selection.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
just some historical data to back it up. If you find it,
yeah,
Jason, just pipe in.
yeah. I mean, I think I don't have it right for. I was trying to find it, but yeah, no team is, and I can't remember how far it goes back, but there hasn't been a team that was a top 2 seed that was unranked preseason that's made the Final Four, and it was like a number over 25. Now, some of that is obviously has to be like variance and randomness, because there have been teams that were unranked that have made it from like other seed lines. And so it's not like a clear indicator, but it does show you that being perceived as having talent and coming in as a contender matters. Like teams that quote underperform their talent can still rise to it in the tournament, and teams that kind of overachieved may have done so. And St. John's, by the way, is also meeting that criteria. They were
Mhm.
not ranked in the preseason. Both those teams are emerging. I'm torn on Michigan State. That's a factor. They have been better with Jace Richardson once they gave him minutes, and he was not playing a ton. So I do think that they are relatively better now than they were in December. But you also wonder. But I mean, I think the biggest factor for them is it's a tough draw, and so I don't know, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see if Michigan State or St. John's can buck the trend, because recent teams that haven't are like Marquette as a 2 seed. The first year they emerged with Kolick, they did not make it. I think there was a few others recently that have flamed out early, and so we'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, definitely Michigan State's a high variance candidate for that reason, I think.
Jason, you mentioned Kansas potentially as a survivor pick. Kind of want to talk survivor strategy real quick here before we get into the region by region stuff. Last year, I picked BYU on day one, and Alex has gently reminded me just how horrible of a selection that was, both process and results wise. So why don't you talk
I
through why that
mean,
was bad, Alex? And
No. I mean, I was there with you. I played BYU too, also, but like, I felt bad about it because it's one of those things where I joined the
immediately,
survivor pool Wednesday night also, and just like clicked the team that I thought was a sharp play without even reading the contest rules. So survivors, like, reading the rules is obviously very important. So for this year, I went through the DK contest, which I'm joining, read the rules. I only need 9 teams, and working backwards, taking a team like BYU that was like a 9-point favorite, probably not the best decision, just how like the contest is structured. So for this year, like, I'm gonna be avoiding like the Gonzaga play and probably Colorado State, who I think could get a little bit overplayed in some of the survivor pools. And like my pools for like day 1 and 2 are teams like Wisconsin and Tennessee, who are like 15, 16, 19-point favorites. Like day 2, like Arizona, Kentucky, Iowa State are teams I'm looking at. So like I don't need to get overly cute and play like a 6-point favorite Gonzaga team against a Georgia team that has talent. And I agree with Jason. I do like Colorado State straight up over Memphis, but Memphis can certainly win that game. So I'm hoping people in my pools gravitate to some of those perceived values without like fully understanding what they're getting into, like I did with
it's
BYU last year.
it's also. I'll throw it to you in a second, Jason. But I just wanted to know, in my pool, 28% of the field picked BYU. So that was sort of the, oh boy, this isn't great. Like, even before the result, when you make that pick, I feel like it's like the bell curve meme where like
Yep.
the lower end of the bell curve and the top end's like just pick like one of those double digit clear favorites, and everybody in the middle is like, oh, I can get by with using BYU, who I'm never going to use again rest of the tournament, and everybody was just seeing the same thing. So it is interesting. I feel like upsets are going to happen throughout the tournament, so you might end up getting better values later on than you think, which has me thinking maybe play it safer early. But Jason, what do you think?
So yeah, I think you're on a key point. And I'll tell you right now, we have a product, a survivor product. And if you are a Pool Pick subscriber, you not only get brackets, but you get the survivor access. and women's brackets this year, by the way. If you want to dabble in some
Nice.
UConn or South Carolina, we are launching for the first time women's brackets, and I've set my ratings on those teams, and we're running the odds, and those brackets will come out on Tuesday. But back to Survivor. Kansas is not our top graded pick. I'm looking at it right now. That was just my gut. Like, oh, maybe I'd pick them. And that would be true if I were playing like a bunch of entries, which I will. But first of all, I would play a bunch of entries. I would not like put all my eggs in one entry at this amount. If I had like X amount to play, I'd probably split it across 10 entries and find a contest I could do that, because I want to play it different ways. And when I look at our grades, because you got to balance, right? Everything's a risk. So every pick's bad. Every pick has risk in some way. If I pick a 1 or 2 seed now, I'm probably advancing, and my risk is I run out of picks late in the contest, right? If I pick a 50% game now, I've got a lot of risk right now, but probably not much in the future if I can somehow hit it. So your best picks ultimately are probably like your 2, 3, 4 seeds that can win but aren't going to go deep. But those teams can still burn you because A, they can get upset, and B, they could reach the Final Four. And so, but those are probably on balance. Like, find a 75% team that is only like 15% to make the Final Four or something like that is probably the best way to play it from like a game theory perspective, because you're less risky now than taking a 50% game, but you're not that much riskier later on.
Yeah, and for people listening, most of these are structured, or at least the DK one that Alex is referencing. You're making a pick each day, and you can never reuse that team again. And if you run out of teams, you lose. But hopefully, and if your team loses, you lose. So,
I'll just add that I think I'm gonna do one this year. That just someone I know is organizing, where you pick 2 teams a day for each of the first 4 days. And if that is how yours works, then I think a team like Gonzaga is a lot more viable.
Yep.
Where you just have to get through a bunch of teams, and so you have to pick the smaller favorites early.
Yeah, you can't show up to the Sweet 16 with like 3 teams used in the same region. You're dead if you do that. So yeah, you definitely have to fire on teams you think are going to lose in the next round.
yeah, that's a good note. With all this stuff, Survivor, bracket pools, you really got to know your format, and the people you're playing against is like 2 of the biggest things, more important than knowing ball, some would say. Let's get into the region by region stuff. We've touched on a lot of this already, so we can go a little bit quicker here, but let's start in the West. I'll just throw it to Jason if you have any top level thoughts, anything that sticks out to you that we haven't covered or you just really want to reiterate.
I mean, I think this is probably, to me, the most difficult region to be in the sense that it's got great team up top, but it's also deep. I think there's lots of teams you could see doing something in this region. So I think this is the best region on balance, for me, because I think you've got like danger in the mid seeds, and you've got I think a live Texas. I mean, Texas Tech is none of those injury variance teams, but I think they're closer to being 100%. If we hear Darian Williams is playing, Chance McMillian is back by the second round, I think Tech is one of those teams that is going to be underpicked and can make a run. This is a make a run to the final type team at their best, but also could lose because of injuries early type of team, which is the kind of team you want to play as your pool size increases. So I think they're an intriguing one. And then you got a lot of other teams I like as sleepers. And then you got the Missouri-Kansas connection, that I'll be watching.
Yeah.
I did not like that Drake draw, by the way. I did not like that Drake draw. That team is full of Kansas City area kids, just as an aside. So a lot of kids that grew up watching Missouri and Kansas, and now they get to play Missouri, and they came from the D2 ranks, so they were kind of under-recruited, and now they went 30-3. Lots on the line in that game.
Yeah, I mean, Ben McCollum came from Northwest Missouri State, right?
Yep.
And now he gets a shot at Missouri, so that's a pretty interesting storyline.
I was going to reiterate the Colorado State point that, like, if you're in a more casual pool, you got to take them in the first round. I mean, to get a 12 seed that's a favorite, that's going to be picked less than 50%. Anytime you can get a favorite that's going to be picked less than 50%, regardless of the seeding, in the casual pools, you gotta do that. Alex or Jack, any other notes, surprise teams for Final Four runs from this region? Feel free to fire away.
I was just a bit bummed my Maryland Terrapins got stuck with on the same side of a bracket with Florida because Florida looks really tough now. And I like the way Maryland played during the Big Ten tournament, and I thought they could make a run, but it's going to be tough to get past Florida.
Yeah, I want to reiterate the Texas Tech point that Jason made, but only if they're healthy. I really think you need Darian Williams and Chance McMillan both to play for them to be live to make a Final Four run. But if they play, I mean, that team can shoot as well as anyone in the country, and they just are really loaded with talent if they have everyone healthy.
All right, let's hop up to the South region where you've got Auburn as the 1 seed, Michigan State as the 2 seed. This is the North Carolina region where if you get them winning in the first 4, as Jason said, it's possible they're a favorite, or that's a pretty tight spread against Ole Miss. Alex, I'll let you kick it off here. Notes on the South region.
Yeah, I mean, this is just the Auburn red carpet region. They just rolled it out for them. I don't see much at all that threatens them. I couldn't see a better draw from Auburn's perspective in terms of potential teams that have to play. I don't think the winner of, I mean, if I'm Auburn, I'm definitely rooting for Creighton in the opening round because the Louisville game is actually could be trickier than like if they play Texas A&M the next round. But yeah, I just think this is Auburn red carpet and they're going to kind of roll through this.
Jack or Jason, anything to add for the South region?
Yeah, my first reaction, I mean, obviously Auburn up top, but then my reaction was if there's going to be something crazy that happens, I think this is the region most likely to produce it. Just because I think some teams outside the top 4 seed lines, because you do have the Michigan State thing, are they really going to be as good as they've shown in the last half of the Big Ten season? You have Iowa State injury impacted. You have an A&M team that runs hot and cold, which I think, by the way, matches up well with Auburn if they get there, but that's certainly no given with how inconsistent they are. And I say that because A&M relies on getting on the glass. They're a bad shooting team, and that's one of Auburn's weaknesses, and we saw them beat Auburn in the regular season by beating them up on the boards. And so I do think that if that matchup plays out, it's somewhat dangerous, but I think A&M's a risk to lay an egg at any point also. And so I think all that stuff, I mean, Louisville's live if they somehow beat Auburn to go to the Final Four, honestly, out of this region as much as anybody else.
Let's go over to the East. This is Duke's region here with Alabama as the 2 seed. The tightest spread here as far as a double-digit seed goes is VCU against BYU. I think we've mentioned that. I've seen it anywhere between 2.5 and 3.5 points. Jack, I'll throw it to you for thoughts on the East region.
Yeah, I kind of think to use the same verbiage as Alex, I kind of think if Flag is healthy, this is the red carpet region, and Duke got a pretty easy draw to the Final Four. I mean, we've got an Alabama team that might be missing Grant Nelson, and even if he plays, it's hard to see him be 100%. This Wisconsin team is good and much different than the Wisconsin teams we're used to seeing. Much faster pace, much better offense. But I think if Duke is healthy, just no one can compete with them. They've been the best team in the country for the past 2 months, and I don't really see anyone challenging them on the way to the Final Four, assuming Cooper Flag is healthy. And I think right now that's a pretty safe assumption.
Jason or Alex, any dark horse Final Four teams, or are you guys all on the chalk with Duke here?
Yeah, I'm definitely on the chalk. I like BYU to potentially make a Sweet 16 run, but beyond that, like I think it's gonna be Duke Bama playing for the Final Four.
All right, let's go to the Midwest, Houston's region as the 1 seed there, Tennessee, the 2 seed at the bottom of the bracket. This is one where I said, sharp pools versus casual pools. I do think, Gonzaga could make a run here just based on some of their metrics. As Jason said, like maybe they aren't really, a top 10 to 12 team, but if there's even a chance they are, it's a pretty good risk to make in some larger pools where, their Final Four selection is going to be pretty low. But other thoughts on the region, Jason?
Yeah, first of all, Kentucky, major concerns there. I mean, I know they're going to say Lamont Butler's going to play. He's missed now 3 different stretches with the same shoulder injury. It keeps getting hurt. And we saw how they struggle without him. If they're down him and Jackson Robinson, I think they're in trouble. So I would be interested in an Illinois run, even though they're high variance out of that region, just for that, like if you can catch some value there. But I think the top 2 seeds here are probably battling it out. I will say on the Purdue High Point game, these teams are like, it's like the Spider-Man meme in some ways. High Point is a really good offensive team out of the mid-major ranks, has a lot of like actual high major transfers that didn't get time with high major teams and transferred in with their coach who's been there 2 years and has really turned that program around. But a very offensive oriented team, just like Purdue. I mean, Purdue, their defense is really struggled at times, and they can score with Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Wren, but they can also give up points. This is going to be a wild, high variance game, I think.
Jack, I saw you smiling a bit as you heard Jason talking about the Kentucky volatility and concerns there as you threw on your Illinois jersey minutes before we started recording. What do you think? Illinois got a run in them?
I just wanted to compliment him on making a really good point about how Kentucky got a really difficult draw facing Illinois in the second round. No, but I do agree with pretty much everything Jason said. I think this is the toughest region. You can kind of see it in the Final Four odds. Houston has much lower Final Four odds pretty much anywhere in market that you look, and a lot of that has to do with losing the Gonzaga lottery and getting a top 10 team in the country as their 8 seed. But Tennessee is also a pretty good 2 seed. Objectively, Illinois is a pretty decent 6 seed as well. So I think this is a fairly difficult region on the whole.
Wondering if anyone has thoughts on Clemson. I saw a note from Evan Maya does some advanced metrics stuff, and I was looking at his lineup metrics, and one of the 5-man rotations for Clemson he has is like one of the top 10 in terms of overall rating. Just thoughts on Clemson from someone who's just purely looking at the numbers.
We've researched it. In fact, I was excited about Clemson. They made a lineup change. They put Chase Hunter's brother Dylan Hunter into the lineup and benched Chauncey Wiggins back in, I think it was early February, and then they beat Duke the next game, and they've been playing really well since. But then he broke his wrist in the ACC tournament, so they're going to go back to probably the player who was being inefficient and who got benched, and who if you read the team blogs, were like, he's inconsistent. He needs to. So I have major concerns about Clemson based on that injury, whereas I would have been live and liked Clemson with what they were doing down the stretch until that injury.
Yeah, I agree with that. Clemson was a team I'd circled like a couple weeks ago, but that definitely hurts quite a bit. And like just to show you how many injury situations we're dealing with, that didn't even make the cut because I don't think Clemson's much of a threat to make a run here. But they're a fun team, and I think they get a pretty good draw to get the Sweet 16 and get to be able to play Houston. But I see them struggling with Houston for sure.
All right, we'll close it out. Everyone's pick to win it. Also, feel free if you want to give Dark Horse Final Four team any other final notes when we do this final pick to win it. Alex, you can go first here. Pick to win the whole thing.
I think Cooper Flag is going to be fine, and Duke has been awesome. So I'm going Duke, and and if I wasn't going Duke, I'd probably be staying with the 1 seed. So yeah, I think it's going to be pretty heavy chalk when we get to Final Four time.
Jack.
I'm taking Duke as well. I just think when Flag's healthy and he seems to be there, they're clearly the best team in the country. They've been a juggernaut for the past 2-3 months at this point. If I were picking a dark horse, it would probably be Gonzaga. If Texas Tech is healthy, I think they'd be my second favorite dark horse, as much as a 3 seed can be a dark horse. But yeah, I think Duke's gonna take it home.
All right, I'll go now so we can give our special guest Jason the final say in all of this. As wearing a UNC jersey, I'm legally not allowed to select Duke. So I will go with Florida here as the pick. Jack mentioned Auburn struggling a little bit, relatively speaking, the last couple of months. And Houston's got that tough draw against Gonzaga potentially in round 2. So if it's not going to be Duke, I'm going to go with Florida.
I like it because just like, the ESPN, game day broadcast where they put the picks up, if we had the graphics up, we would be kiboshing Duke if we had 4 straight on the bottom. I mean, Duke would be my pick to win the title if I were in a bracket of integrity. Now, I would play multiple brackets and diversify off that, but I would pick Duke and I would pick Florida. And I think unfortunately Florida has done so well now that that's not a contrarian position. Whereas I had Florida over power rated above Auburn 3 weeks ago. And I think had they started the brackets then, I would have got them at a value, but that is not the case anymore. But this Florida team has been great since Thanksgiving. This Florida team, you don't know how much stuff plays in, but we could kind of forget. Their coach was accused of a Title IX violation, like right as the season was starting. They did not start great, and they had transfers in the mix. But man, they've been the second best team in the country now consistently for 4 months, whereas Auburn has dipped. And so I think Florida's deep. They have so much height, all that stuff. So if I were picking those two, that would be the top two. But, I'm going to play some brackets because Florida may be getting too popular by the time Wednesday rolls around. They're certainly gaining steam. A lot of talking heads on ESPN are picking them, all that stuff. So I wonder if Florida's almost going to outperform their expectations and maybe even get ahead of Duke in popularity by the time we roll with the public, because there's plenty of Duke haters out there. So Duke's my pick.
All right, 3 Duke, 1 Florida. That's going to do it for us on the special Established Run edition of March Madness. Thanks so much to Jason for joining us. Make sure you check out PoolGenius again. Go to poolgenius.com/ETR, and shout out to Jack and Alex for joining as well. Alex manning our ETR college basketball product. Appreciate everybody for tuning in and listening. Best of luck this March Madness.